It's very, very difficult to run a campaign like this up against the two parties, and we've just got to do it. And what makes me really convinced that we're able to do it is because Americans overcome far more difficult problems in their personal lives than civic engagement. You get an ailing child, an ailing parent trying to make ends meet, working 2 jobs, accidents. They deal with far, far more wrenching, difficult, time-consuming problems. We've got to look at civic engagement as a joy, and not just in terms of what it can do for the country, but just part of enjoying life is pursuing justice and connecting with your fellow citizens, your neighbors, co-workers. That's why some of the great protest music came out of these kinds of struggles. In the 30s, for example. The great music of social justice comes out of activity by people, not just injustice. Activity to try to deal with it. And, so thank you again very much. I appreciate it. Can we start? Can we start? Yes, sir? Can you hear me from here? Yes. If you just get a little closer.
Just basically,
I'll repeat it.
I've been reading a lot about the Reserve, the Income Tax Act of 1960, and just the kind of illegality of it. And we didn't always have the Federal Reserve working with that. Basically, what is your position on that, or what is about that?
The question dealt with the Federal Reserve and my opinion of it. It came into being, created in Washington about not quite 100 years ago. The Federal Reserve is our central bank, but the bankers control this government agency. They fund it. It's not funded by congressional appropriations. So unlike other countries in the Western world, for example, who have chancellors of the exchequer, they have in effect a cabinet-level department accountable to the parliament. The Federal Reserve is the banking industry's powerful institution of government. And that's why they bailed out Bear Stearns so readily when they didn't do their job in preventing the conditions that led to the kind of excessive risk-taking of Bear Stearns. And they bailed it out $29 billion a few weeks ago. It's not accountable. We really have to have it very much accountable to Congress, and therefore it should be supported by Congress, not by bank fees and by bank directors. Yes?
New Jersey Peace Action versus Bush. That's going to be what my question is about. But first I have to tell you, I was on the board of Berger, Public Interest Research Group in Michigan, about 35 years ago.
Oh, there you are, you see? He was with one of the groups we helped start in Michigan, student groups. What university did you go to?
Michigan.
Ann Arbor? Yeah.
And I think you're right when you ask what's going to stop us. And what's going to stop us is us, as Ben Franklin told Mrs. Powell. We only have a republic or a democracy if we keep it. Anyway, what I've been looking at recently is this case called, well, it's a website called warpower.us. 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 And it's to support concepts concerning the interplay between Congress, the President, and the people. New Jersey Peace Action versus Bush is brought on behalf of voters. And I guess since it was just filed May 13th, my first question is, have you heard of it? And if you have, what do you think about it?
I've not heard of it, but I'm glad you bring it to my attention. We need to wage peace. And when Dennis Kucinich said we need a Department of Peace, he was ridiculed. Why ridicule? Why was ridiculed? why do we have $700 billion a year to deal with war, and there isn't a Department of Peace? So peace is viewed in some circles as weak and anemic and concessionary. Peace requires the greatest moral courage of all. Preventing death, injury, war is one of the highest obligations of human beings. So we need these kinds of chapters in state after state. I like the phrase waging peace as a muscular tone to it. Yes?
Mr. Nader, what would you say the difference is between a vote for you and a vote for the Green Party? Right now I'm kind of undecided about whether to vote for you or to vote for whoever the Green Party candidate ends up being.
Well, either way, you can't lose. I mean, they have a very good agenda. I ran on it in 2000. But you have to look at the record and the accomplishments of the nominees. The Green Party doesn't have a nominee. Cynthia McKinney and others are running for it, though. But it's good. We need more. I'm all for more parties. We've got to have more diversity, more choice on the ballot. Country as great as ours in size and power, we've got these two narcissistic parties controlling us, and dividing us, and making people who agree with one another fight each other. I mean, you feel like a puppet unless you break through. We have to break through. It's hard at the beginning, be easier. As I.F. Stone once said, how many of you remember I.F. Stone? He once said, the history of social justice movements is that people have to be prepared to lose, and then to lose until the groundwork is laid and the momentum builds up, and then people will win. If you're not prepared to go through this process, you don't know history. What social justice movement won on the first round? You have to keep pressing, keep pushing. Yes?
Yes, hi. Very practical question for all of us who will be collecting signatures on the petitions. We're going to hear on the street that you cost us you cost us the 2004 election. And I think it would be very helpful if we could get something like 3 or 4 good bullet points right now, where we could say exactly what to say to people on the street who are going to tell us that.
You mean 2000 election?
Yes.
I couldn't possibly be accused of 2004.
What was that?
Okay, here's what you say. There's not much time, right? Here's what you said. Ask Gore. He believes he won. Don't you? He believes it was stolen from him in Florida in the Supreme Court. Don't you? Go after the thieves, not after people you agree with. There are other ways to say it. A quick way is, gee, I thought Bush got more votes from Gore than I did. Ah. You see? You start thinking, why don't they go after Bush? Why do they go after the little guy? Do they think the little guy's a second-class citizen? Don't we have equal rights to run for election? Don't we try to get votes from one another? We're either none of us are spoilers or all of us are spoilers. That's a contemptuous word, by the way. And so you could just give them that kind of thing. I get that at airports, for example. You cost Gore the election. Say, ask Gore. He believed he won, didn't you? It was stolen from him. Don't you believe that?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
All right. Ralph, I'm here tonight because I heard you on Democracy Now! This morning, and on other times. I've heard you many times, and I'm very impressed with you, as we all are. The problem is that I don't know how much I can trust my fellow Americans. I'm a 48-and-a-half-year listener member of WBAI. That means I go back to when the station began.
Yes.
I have had my freedom of speech violated on the air by WBAI broadcasters. It is the time, and who the hell are you? Why don't you come up here?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to bring it to your attention. And I will admit that I've never gone to you and asked you for help. When these two young men were here there wasn't a young woman, but there was a young woman who made that film about you. So that was good, but it hurt me not to see a woman urging, shall we say, fundraising. But for some reason, Amy Goodman, who I approached, didn't care to help me. But what is important is that the station is being heard because they have never taken this issue, and then there are people like this who put me down. And so I say to you, what can you do about this situation where people turn on a decent person and humiliate them for years? And I don't know what to do. Al Lewis said, Monroe, there is no free speech on my show. And the people of the WPAI community let it pass.
Why don't you, is there a volunteer here? Why don't you give your story to the volunteer? Because I obviously there's no time to go into the detail. He's right here. He's right here in back
I
here.
have to make an issue of it.
And we'll look at it. We'll look into
It's
it.
going down so far
Yeah.
that it hurts me.
Yeah, take a story down. Yes.
Hi, Ralph. Doug White with the New York City 911 Ballot Initiative. My question for you is, many Americans seem to be very clear about the fact that we were lied to 935 times at least in the lead up to the Iraq War. But they don't seem to have a problem with the 911 attacks themselves. Why is it that Americans understand clearly that our government lied to us about the lead up to the Iraq War, but they're willing to trust them in terms of the 911 attacks? I mean, it doesn't seem to be very logical to us. So I'd just like to have your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I don't think they believe in either place. Obviously, Bush is the most multiply impeachable president in history. You've got the criminal war. Nixon was about to be impeached for the burglary, Watergate, and Nixon resigned, and Agnew resigned for other reasons, and Clinton was impeached for lying about sex under oath. Yet here you have one high crime and misdemeanor after another, the criminal war in Iraq, and imprisoning people without charges, spying on people without judicial approval, systemic torture, and so on. And nothing happened. People, when they're lied to a lot and they're betrayed a lot, it becomes banal. That is, they internalize it and they give up on it. Hannah Arendt used the phrase banality of evil. And I see this happen. Once in a while, when they're lied, when they don't expect to be lied to, they get really angry, but then they're lied day after day, and they just sort of throw in the towel and go about their daily lives. The 9/11 report would never have occurred if it wasn't for the families. In other words, you had this complex attack on the United States, and the federal government was not going to have an official inquiry. Just think of that. And the families of the deceased kept pressuring, so finally they appointed this commission, and it said right in the outset it wasn't going to name names or hold anybody accountable. What kind of investigative commission is this? Is this just a narrative? It reads pretty well, by the way, as a sort of narrative. As a result, because they weren't going to hold anybody responsible, there are questions they didn't ask. This testimony they didn't obtain. And they allowed Bush and Cheney to sit in a room with the doors closed and preventing him from taking notes. That was part of the deal. And they would answer questions not under oath. And the commission members were not allowed to take notes. This is not a commission. That's why here in New York they're collecting, 50,000 signatures?
50,000.
To put it on the ballot in the city of New York. So in November, you can vote in a new inquiry with subpoena power. And so that there are no excuses, there's no budget for it. It's really interesting. It's without a budget, and I guess you're going to raise the budget privately. And that will be easy to do, given what I hear around the country. So it's too easy just to say it was a colossal sequence of massive, serial, repetitive incompetence. So we need, look, without going into conspiracy theories, we need a more probing, honest, subpoena-driven inquiry. It is interesting that very, very few people were reprimanded or fired. Doesn't that tell you something? Why very few people reprimanded or fired? And obviously things went wrong, and there should have been people held responsible. But in Washington, failure incurs no penalty. Actually, you can get a talk show or get elected if you mess up. So that's what they're doing now to get to the bottom of it. Yes?
At the May 31st Cooper Union, I raised the subject of the 16th Amendment of the Constitution in 1913 being fraudulently passed, and you had comments about that. I just want to raise today the idea of using the elimination of the IRS just to appeal to the public in the most crass way. That a lot of people are not going to be intellectual in thinking about the issues the way you are an expert. So, what do you think of the idea of just asking the public, people who don't even understand your role in American history, which is great, hey, vote for Nader and you won't have to pay taxes. Maybe that, something dumb as that can launch you from 6% to 60%.
And we'll all build our own subway trains, right? No. Here's my tax philosophy. We should tax first things that society likes the least or dislikes the most before we tax human labor or the necessities of life. Right now, we sales tax the necessities of life and we tax human labor. We should tax first $500 trillion of security derivative speculation on Wall Street. Because as a society, we don't like excessive speculation, and we don't like even more than being bailed out by us in Washington on the backs of taxpayers. Right. So the second thing we should tax, we should tax the addictive industries more, we should tax gambling more, we should tax pollution more, we should tax, through like a carbon tax, we should tax corporate crime more. So tax things you want to depress and you want to diminish before you tax human labor. The second thing is you do not tax human labor more than you tax capital gains. Right now, capital gains is 15% and human labor is up to 38%. So we need a debate on this. The people who say no more taxes, and I've talked to so many of them, they don't answer the question. These are the same people that want a strong defense, you know, Pentagon budget. These are the same people who complain about all kinds of public services, contaminated drinking water, and crumbling schools. Now, they may think that all this can be done by voluntary assessment. And there is a place for utopia in our country. Bless the utopians. But they got to make a stronger argument than what they're making now. And one way we can resolve this is to go after things we like the least and dislike the most before we tax workers and so on. Just a tiny tax on securities derivative speculation, fraction of 1%. And no one making up to $100,000 a year would have to pay a cent of federal income tax. And there'd be money left over. Because one thing you can rest your laurels on, the computers are going to increase those transactions to 700 trillion, 800 trillion, you know, be quadrillion pretty soon. So as long as they keep it going, they keep paying taxes. And they won't, and then they won't speculate as much, maybe. Maybe then it'll go down. But there'll always be bad things to tax. Tax bad things first before you tax good things. Yes?
Yes, I'm really excited about what I hear about the Google debates. A lot of people on here, big supporters. Debate's really, really important. I think all of us would like to see debate McCain, debate on. But during the Democratic primaries, a lot of treacherous things happened, particularly in Nevada, where Kucinich was disinvited. And, because Bill Richardson dropped out, he was disinvited, he sued and won, but in the Nevada Supreme Court, NBC overturned the lower decision, and he was essentially banned. So there are a lot of these tactics, that I sort of trust what's going to happen. What can we do? How can we help? What kind of ruckus can we make? What can we do to help get you on the mainstream televised space?
Well, the Debate Commission is a private company. We've sued them. You can't sue them under anything. I mean, we tried to sue them on a number of grounds and lost. You can't sue them under the Constitution because they're a private corporation. As long as they have the cooperation of NBC, ABC, CBS, CNN to get it to you, it's hard to break it. That's why the Google option is mildly exciting, because they can deliver through YouTube and elsewhere. They can deliver an audience, a very substantial. Look, until you break the two parties and their grip on ballot access and their grip on the debates, we're going to be frustrated. And the only way we can break them is to deny them the vote. That's the one thing that's within our power. You deny them the vote. That's the one thing they will respect you for and fear you for, if you deny them the vote. There are three categories of voters. There's the hereditary voters who will vote for the Republican or Democrat nominee because their great-grandparents were Republican Democrats. There's the tactical voter who sort of doesn't like both parties, but they go for the least worst. And if they don't demand, then they basically are giving their votes, taking their votes for granted. They have no power. They don't demand something in return. And then there's the voter of conscience. And if we were all voters of conscience, if we voted for someone who we believe in, regardless of what the polls say, and maybe the polls will start reflecting something different in American politics. I had a conversation with, you'll be amused by this little story. I had a conversation with Mayor Bloomberg 2 hours before he went to the press and said he wasn't going to run. Yeah, he didn't tell me that, but obviously. And I said, well, what's going on here? You're going to turn it into a three-way race? And he said, look, I've done surveys and polls for months and months in this country, and let me tell you what I believe. He said, 15% of the Republicans would vote for the Republican nominee if the Republican nominee was Leon Trotsky. And 15% of the Democrats would vote for the Democratic nominee if the nominee was Ayn Rand. Draw your own conclusions. When a multi-billionaire comes up against that kind of frustration, basically preordained votes. Doesn't matter who they are, but a significant number of voters just vote the party. Yes. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm a journalist with a publication in Washington called Cuba News. That's cubanews.com. And I'm just basically here to get your position in terms of trade with Cuba and also travel to Cuba. Under the Bush administration, there's been a significant cracking down on anybody who wants to take a trip to Cuba. For example, the Beacon School here in the Upper West Side, Treasury Department out there making a so-called unlicensed trip out there. So I just want to get your comments on your position on travel and trade with Cuba.
I'll give you three guesses. First of all, isn't it interesting that Bush encourages trade with the communist, brutal dictatorship of China and travel to China, but somehow not to Cuba? Well, China is a much more repressive regime. Well, first, obviously, you get rid of the embargo, you have travel, you let the relatives remit to their families, and you have diplomatic relations. What's the point? We've been trying to overthrow and destroy illegally that government, overthrow its rulers, and where has it gotten us? Why can we have diplomatic relations with Burma or China and not diplomatic relations with Cuba? And guess where Obama is on this? Guess where McCain is on this? See? McCain wants to sort of maintain the status quo. He might lift some of the trade restrictions because the farmers want to sell food and the oil. But Obama goes down to South Florida and he basically says he'll let them, visit their relatives a little more?
Well, instead of once every 3 years, he'll just let me come once every year.
There you go.
Yeah.
I hate to say this because I really wish Obama well, but I think he is going to be the greatest disappointment given the expectation levels that he's had. Look who his economic advisors are. He voted to reauthorize the Patriot Act, and he's a constitutional law teacher. He voted to oppose the reform of the Mining Act of 1872, which gives away our hard rock minerals like gold and silver to any corporation. He's voted for all but one authorization to continue funding the war in Iraq. He voted for the terrible restrictions on consumer class actions that the big corporations who are the defendants wanted him to do so. And I can give you dozens of examples. In fact, Matt Gonzalez, my running mate, civil rights lawyer in San Francisco, has written a 3,000-word treatment on Obama's record. It's on our website, votenader.org. How many of you have actually seen our website? Oh, that's great. Yeah, thank you. It's a very vibrant one. It will become even more vibrant. And, but you see, here's the point. As far as liberals are concerned, Obama's getting a free ride. In 2004, we checked 19 liberal progressive groups supporting Kerry. You know, labor, environment, women, poverty, consumer, all that, housing. Not one of them made a demand on Kerry. You see, that's what the two-party elected dictatorship does. Once you get into a least worst, why make a demand? You don't want to shake up your least worst. They have such low confidence in the popularity of their positions. I mean, why not demand on Kerry that he have a $10 minimum wage? Is that an unpopular thing? He might have won Florida with that. That's equivalent to 1968. So we have to very seriously not take rhetoric for an answer. Rhetoric is the opiate of unthinking voters. Yeah.
Your partner who invited me here tonight said that he heard you speaking about the food crisis, the global and domestic food crisis, and I'm sure you were drawing attention to the corporate profiteering from it, great corporate profiteering. And I'm really glad you were speaking about it because it's blatantly absent from the rest of sort of political discourse and from the rest of the election discussion. And I'm part of a growing coalition of groups around the country that are trying to have a unified response to the food crisis, and the idea is to get it more into the political discussions, into the election debates, etc. And I guess I'm just wondering if you have ideas on how to best actually make it relevant, what sort of messaging could actually get this into the discussion, in your opinion. Thank you.
Well, there's plenty of information on it in the press, and especially in recent months. One is the grounds for eliminating subsidies to corn ethanol, which are taking millions of acres out of wheat, barley, soy, tightening supplies, raising prices, and corn ethanol is a horrible net energy biofuel. It takes about as much energy in to get the energy you get out of, like burning a lot of coal. So that's one. And that is ricocheting around the world in terms of, it's not the only factor in food price inflation, but it is a significant one. The second is to have a foreign policy where we have our country become a humanitarian superpower. A humanitarian superpower, not a military superpower. What is a humanitarian superpower? It's one that goes around the world at the invitation of people, not just governments, and shows how agricultural production can be vastly increased with very minimal inputs, like agriculture cooperatives, land reform, and a advanced knowledge about the use of water. There's plenty of land in Africa, but there's very little water. And a lot of the water that is used in ways that evaporate and is very inefficient. So we do have a lot of appropriate technology here that we can help. But that's not going to occur if we continue to support dictators and oligarchs and invade countries that don't threaten us, instead of supporting the workers and the peasants for a change. That's what we need to do. The solutions are available. 30% of all food produced in the third world is lost through rodents, insects, and fungus. Do we know how to deal with more efficient storage and transport of food to save that huge amount of food? Sure we do. Cargill knows it. Department of Agriculture knows it. Instead, we're the leading arms exporters in the world. Instead, we want more nuclear subs, each one of which can destroy 200 cities in the world. One Trident sub can destroy 200 cities, multiple nuclear warheads. So really, we got to get our social indignation increasing. You can have all this knowledge in your head, but if you don't have fire in your belly, it's not going to move. You have to have fire in your belly. Rosa Parks had fire in her belly. See, the sit-down strikers in Flint, Michigan in the 30s against General Motors, they had fire in their belly. The people who marched for arms control, they had fire in their belly. So that's what you want to do with your friends and neighbors. It's not enough they know. You got to have fire in your belly. You got to have a sense of urgency. That's why a lot of liberal reporters criticize us. They're just reporters. They're commentators. They're not advocates. They're not on the front lines in Washington. They're commentators. They all have good jobs, good retirement, good health insurance. They don't have that sense of urgency that asks the tough questions about their least worst party. There's an equitable doctrine that basically says this: something can be illegal. Crossing the border is illegal. It's not a felony, but crossing the border is illegal. But if they are accepted by U.S. employers, and the U.S. government does nothing about these U.S. employers, then there's a certain equitable doctrine that their illegal entry has been essentially neutralized. And year after year, they have been accepted. They clean up after us, they harvest our food, they prepare our food, they take care of our grandparents, they do all the work nobody wants to do in this country. Now, if the minimum wage was $10, if it was $12, if it was $14, there'd be more Americans doing this kind of work. So part of the problem is that the minimum wage is too low for this. I mean, just the costs of commuting, the cost of daycare. You go to work for Walmart, $7.50 an hour before deductions. I mean, how do you even make it work? You know, for a meal, supporting your family and so on. $500 daycare now is the average cost a month. So we have to be much more hard-headed here. And there is a power of brokers in this country that want open borders, they want cheap labor that's exploitable and desperately repressed so that they can't speak out. And when you're illegal in this country and you got a job, they can push you around and harm you and do anything they want. And you're afraid to go to the police for obvious reasons. We have to secure our boundaries for criminal smuggling purposes, for two-way pollution purposes, for infectious disease purposes, not just for illegal entry. And that's why the Wall Street Journal wants open borders, because they want cheap labor, and that's how they get it. And we've got to be very hard-headed. We don't need politically correct stuff here. We've got to be humane and hard-headed. For example, children of immigrants who are here illegally should not get health care. What if they get an infectious disease? You want to be practical about it. And it starts spreading. So, we didn't want to pay for these kids having health care. They are here. They're doing work that people desperately want done. I mean, just imagine 10 million of them going on strike, and you'll see what happens in this country. But that doesn't mean in the future we do not control our borders, and they're not just Mexican borders. They're eastern borders, western borders, Canadian borders. And one area I'd really come down hard on. I am appalled by the greed of our country in brain draining the rest of the world. We should not have H-1B visas. We tell the rest of the third world, you better develop. What's wrong with you? You need scientists, engineers, doctors, nurses, entrepreneurs, and then we bring them into this country and drain these countries of that kind of technical, professional, and dynamic skill. That's why when someone asks me, what's my policy on immigration, you got 10 seconds on TV.
Why do you call them illegal?
Because they are illegal.
No, they're human beings.
No, they're human beings.
They're human beings.
Yes.
And the Statue of Liberty.
Yes.
The Statue of Liberty says we take your
okay.
equal.
The legal status has very little to do with how you treat people. But you have to recognize that it's a way to reduce the labor in this country, wages and standards. That's why the Wall Street Journal loves more and more of these kinds of entries. Let's face it, the minute you fall into the trap you've just fallen into, you're confusing the issues. And if you listen to me carefully, even though you seem to display all the signs of a soliloquist, you would know that I didn't disagree with you.
Ralph, it seems to my mind that we've reached the point of absurdity with the voice of reason and of interest to the real people like yourself not being able to be acted upon because we have this anachronism called the Electoral College that essentially is keeping the people from seeing a real choice in the ballot box via something as rational and sane as an instant runoff. But the instant runoff, without the abolition of the Electoral College, still leaves you in the duopoly shell game, as I see it. So my question to you is quite simply, what is keeping all these disparate voices, the Green Party, your own organizations, and the panoply of, small minority voices from coming together somehow and getting the job done of getting rid of this Electoral College, essentially barrier to a popular vote for the national government?
Well, it takes a constitutional amendment, but it can be done in other ways. And a couple of states now have done it. I think it's Maine. They've diluted it, so now Maine, it's 2 districts. So you can split the electoral vote if Republicans say win one district, Democrat win the other. That's the beginning. But that opens an interesting door, which means you don't have to go through the elaborate, agonizing process of repeal or amending the Constitution. And you can do it in a way that Maryland, Colorado, and others are recommending, that they pass a law that says that the electors will respect the majority vote. See? And if they all do it in an interstate compact, then basically the majority vote rules, and the Electoral College is totally fastidious.
I just see that as the key obstacle for getting the voice heard, because as long as that is there, you're always got this obstacle of don't waste your vote. You got your choice of the lessers. Just stick with the game.
And every 4 years, both parties get worse.
Right.
Because every 4 years,
it's never going to change until
the votes are taken.
That is dealt with.
Well, you think the Democrats who lost the presidency in many ways, but in 2000, it was the Electoral College. Gore won the popular vote nationwide, 500,000 votes. In any other country, that would be it. So did they mount an attack on the Electoral College? We went up to the Hill and asked them. There was no interest whatsoever. Only activities at the state level. And that's where it can happen. And that's why you've got to pressure the state legislators to get it done. There's already a good start. And it could happen. Once you get like 10 states doing it, then it becomes a real momentum and it goes through very quickly. It's a very simple bill, just a paragraph. And everybody understands it in these legislative halls. Yes?
Hi. I voted for you the last 2 times. I think you're one of the most brilliant men in America. I don't see how you could win this election. And if Obama does become the president of the United States, is there a way where you could work with him, where you could become a part of his cabinet, where you could use all of the power and intellect and knowledge that you have to help him make change?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because last year, I don't know if I mentioned this, from April to August, did I mention I was trying to get an appointment with him? Oh, that was at the press conference, sorry. From April to August last year, I'd either call or have my associates call his Senate office. Will Senator Obama meet with Mr. Nader? Well, he's busy this week. What about next week? Well, he's tied up. By August, after all these procrastinations, I had my associate call and say, anytime from August to December 31st at his office. He said, not interested. Now, why? I use this as a litmus paper test. The reason why is he doesn't want to hear what I have to say. He doesn't want to listen to my questions. That's why. So my door is open. And I'm going to write him a letter very shortly and ask to meet with him again. The irony is when he graduated from Harvard Law School, his first job was with NYPIRG.